Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Really excited for today's webinar on how to build a successful ESG roadmap. By way of introduction, my name is Seth Foreman. I'm the CEO at Socialsuite. For those unfamiliar with Socialsuite, we are a global sustainability and impact technology company specializing in double materiality software. Since 2015, we focus on helping organizations with simple, secure, and cost-effective solutions. Now, for those tuning in for the first time, we do offer a variety of different content. We produce webinars at minimum on a monthly basis on a whole slew of different topics. Feel free to go to our website and our webinar section. You can find all the different webinars that we produce. We also have a really popular YouTube channel, which you could also find our content as well. Now, moving into today's webinar, I do want to go through a couple housekeeping items. Our webinar today will be about 30 to 45 minutes of content. If you look on the right side, you'll see that there is a chat section. If you have any questions, feel free to type it in, and throughout the webinar or at the end during a Q&A section, we'll be able to answer any of your questions. Additionally, the webinar will be recorded, and we will be distributing the recording soon after the completion of today's webinar. So without further ado, let's meet our speakers today. I will first ask our guest, Christine Uri, if you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Of course. Hi, I'm Christine Uri. I guess you just said my name. I'm the founder of ESG for In-house Counsel. So I work with general counsel at corporations to help them strategize, implement, and report on sustainability programs. My background is as a lawyer. I've been a chief legal officer, a chief sustainability officer at a Fortune 500 energy company. So I've actually operationalized about everything ESG myself, from climate to human rights to ethics. And what I do is just bring that on the ground experience to helping other companies do the same today.
Thanks, Christine. I'll add that Christine has an incredible following on LinkedIn and is one of the most biggest thought leaders on all over LinkedIn. So we're really excited to have you on today and sharing your thoughts on this subject. And over to Dr. Tim, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Seth. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tim Siegenbeek from Heukelom. I'm the Chief Impact Officer at Socialsuite, and I'm really looking after the global ESG landscape at Socialsuite, making sure that the latest developments in reporting, but also in compliance, in operational excellence around sustainability, that we really kind of simplify that in terms of like helping people understand what that means, making sure our products do the latest that's required from the market at large, and really help you with simple and affordable solutions to progress that ESG journey. And really kind of looking forward to have that conversation today about how that ESG roadmap can look like.
Perfect. Thanks, Tim. So I'm going to drop off the stage. I'll hand the keys over to you, Tim, to take us through the content. I'll be back on for Q&A. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Seth. Looking forward to going through the webinar today to look at how to build that successful ESG roadmap. And the agenda is pretty straightforward and simple today. We're really going to go into that roadmap. And at the end, we'll make sure that there are some considerations that Christine and I will share about what are some key actions and thoughts and considerations to really get started with that roadmap, some tips and tricks, basically. So what we're going to do is, first off, we're going to take you through a framework for building that ESG roadmap to really guide your sustainability journey. So today we're going to look at 5 components there. We're going to look at the first about relevance, building support internally, and then at the 3 kind of really key things. Then once you've done those first more like preparation steps there, is how to set strategy, take action, and report progress on what you're doing. So 5 key steps. We're going to walk through that. Quite excited about that. Christine, like what we see often is that ask any consultant, sustainability practitioner, and they all have a slightly different ESG journey there. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is there one right way to do things, or is it always kind of a mix of the same components, but people just stick different labels on it?
Okay. Good question. So I would say it's more B. It's usually a mix of the same components, and every consultant, advisor, sustainability person is going to have their own, favorite way of engaging these. I would say, this is what you have here is the order that I put an ESG roadmap building process in. But sometimes these just have to switch around depending on what's happening with the company. I mean, sometimes the, reporting gets moved up earlier, or you have to take some action before you can really build that executive support. But fundamentally, think about these as pillars that every program needs to have. And if you call them something else, I don't really care. But every program needs to have these foundational pillars.
And I think that's spot on there. If you're just doing one component, so take, for instance, reporting. If you think sustainability is just about disclosing your metrics and nothing else, hopefully today you'll see that there's a lot more to it. Sometimes, like you said, the order might be slightly different, and that's fine. There's not one right way that exactly everyone needs to do. It will really depend on your business and where you are in that process. But what we hope to share with you today is some of those building blocks there, and framework for how you can put that roadmap together. So let's start with that first component. Let's talk a little bit about relevance there. Like, what do we mean with that? And what we really kind of want to look at is three elements in there. Is looking at ESG review, what you're already doing, what you should be doing, materiality assessments are working out, what's important and what's not for your business, and looking at a gap analysis. So with that, I think jumping into that first component there, an ESG review, like how useful is that for companies, and what do you find that companies get out of that process generally? Looking at what would they be doing in that kind of review process?
Yeah. Oh, a lot of times when companies are more at the beginning of their journey, or perhaps starting to up level after they've gone through a couple cycles, there'll be this kind of mentality, especially ESG. It's such a broad term, and you can put so many things in those buckets that have to do everything, and they'll want to take kind of I call it a peanut butter spread approach, where you're just doing a little bit of everything, and you'll never be successful that way. A company, you have limited resources. Humans have limited mental resources. You have to choose where you focus. And I always actually try to drive executive teams to choose, no more than 3 big focus areas. Sometimes you have to have a couple minor focus areas in there, but and a key piece of that is relevance. Now, the good news is when you go out and you kind of first make a list of what you're looking for. And if you go out and scan across your company, almost always companies will find that they have more going on with ESG than they know. As what happens is in little silos, maybe your safety team or your facilities team or your IT team will have taken some initiative, implemented something, whether it's, computer recycling, or, hey, we're going to put in LED lighting, and you won't even know about it. So you can kind of gather those things up, and you get a little bit of a burst of energy from knowing that you're doing great things. And then finding out what your stakeholders really expect from you. And that's where the materiality assessments come in. You have to know, what are your stakeholders, your employees, your clients, your investors asking from you, so that you can right size the actions that you're taking to the expectations that are in the market, and avoid kind of spinning your wheels on topics and in areas that aren't going to move the needle.
I think that's a really good point there. It's getting that first off, and I think it's really beneficial for companies to have that list of what are we doing, and really look at that every year. Like, you have that annual reporting cycle around sustainability. You're potentially doing your roadmap every year as well, to really kind of take that moment before you get started and say, so what are we doing? Just make the long list of all the initiatives, the policies, the programs, what's in place, what should we be doing? So is there any compliance? Is there anything out there, like in the US, there's the SEC rules, and you got the California Senate bills. You got also in Europe potential legislation and Canadian legislation. So what is affecting you? So I think the compliance element is really important. And then after that, and that will just make me jump to the next slide. You're right. There's a lot you could be doing. So you might have that long list with a lot of things on there you're already doing. There might be a list of things you might have to do pretty soon from a more compliance perspective, but also from stakeholders that are just asking you for particular information. And if we think about ESG and just kind of, simplicity, break that up again in the EDS and the G there, these are just some topics. There's a lot more. So I've kind of left not everything's on there. But if you go through that, you can come up with hundreds of different topics and subtopics around environment, social, and governance. And you can spread yourself really thin, that peanut butter approach. You can try to do everything there, but not do anything really well. So taking it back to first working out of these topics, which are really relevant, really important to my business, and what should I really be disclosing on because they are material. Pick a few. That gives you some idea of what should you be disclosing information on. But even then, we see companies come out with, let's say, a dozen topics that feel are material. But where can you really impact through your business model? What can you really do that really changes how you impact stakeholders? And I think that goes back to that prioritization you just flagged. Pick 3 areas for this year that you actually can make a change in. Yeah, you might be reporting on a few more and some smaller matters that are material and you're disclosing information, but where are the areas that you can really put time and energy in? And I think that materiality assessment is such a good kind of next step there. You do your long list, you do your materiality assessment. But once you've done both there, then I think the next step, the gap analysis, and this slide looks very busy, I do realize that, but I think it is good to kind of see, can you bring that all together in a way? Can you look at, on the left, here's an example, a list of some material topics. We've highlighted 3 of them. And once you go through, okay, we've worked out now through that materiality assessment, which topics are material, important to us. Let's link it back to that list we did. What are we already doing? And are there things on that list that match up with take number 4 here, employee development? And we see that in this example, there's no goals, no plan in place. There's no budget line. We only do some ad hoc training. We don't really disclose training hours because we don't really do it. But if that is material and you find out that that is something your workforce really requires, maybe you need to start thinking about that. And equally, if you find you do a lot of things that are not related to any material topics, then maybe you should, deprioritize that and think about some of the things you should be doing. And again, think about that compliance element there as well. Now, in that gap analysis, Christine, what do you see? What are the challenges that companies come up to in working out in that early phase, basically where they stand?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is always, wanting to do too much when you just really can only accomplish a couple major things a year. And so I like the way that you've mapped this out, because if you look at this, it looks like this company in your example has actually done quite a bit of work on carbon, which is fantastic. And you should continue, you certainly, if you're looking at stakeholder analysis and what clients and investors are asking for, I can tell you that climate is the biggest non-negotiable today. I mean, investors and clients really want that climate data. And once you provide the data, they really want improvements. So it's good that this particular company has done that action. But if you see a major hole in terms of what your stakeholders are asking for, then that probably needs to be a top line initiative for your company. And I got to tell you, right now is the perfect time to be thinking about it, because we're in the summer. As soon as you guys go back in September, there's going to be some kind of goal setting process for 2025. If you do this kind of assessment this fall, you will be in a position to be able to decide, like, okay, well, for 2025 and our budget and our strategic goals, we really have to make progress on XYZ area. So let's make that the top line goal for next year. And let's make that, one of the, like I said, 3 areas that we're going to really move the needle on.
Yeah, now spot on. And what we see as well is doing this preparation work in that relevance phase there. If you do it well and you really, talk to your stakeholders and look across your full value chain, your supply chain, but also downstream, really look at where do we have impacts. So how are we impacting people and planet, but also where are those risks and opportunities? And Seth just shared a really good example that we had just this morning from the Financial Times. Porsche, the car manufacturer, has a profit warning because there's massive flooding in Europe, and that's affecting their supply of aluminum. So they now see that there's a big risk there, and that, it's a climate-related risk there, physical impact from climate change there. There's flooding everywhere. They're not getting in their supply chain the aluminum they need for the car production. So that type of thinking is really important, where you take, real-world events, physical outcomes of climate change there, and you take those things and you say, so where does that fit? It fits on the climate, done that materiality assessment, and I see there's a risk here. How are we going to address that and flag that and, and have that on the radar? And that could be a lot of things, a lot of topics there that you just have to kind of systematically work your way through. Now, let's say that you've gone through that relevance phase, you've mapped a lot of these things out. We do see that sometimes happen by sustainability team, or there's a designated working group that's working their way through. You have a pretty good idea what you want to do this year, but then you need to get some internal support, because you might be, a few individuals there or a particular team that says, we know what to do. But it's really important to realize sustainability and ESG is not a siloed function, and it should not be. It should be really everyone's responsibility. But you need to take that to the business, and you need to really engage internal stakeholders and drive. Often we find education and change management around why is it so important, and start building that business case there. So why do we need to do sustainability? It's not just a tick box compliance exercise there. Frame it around the triple bottom line. Like, how can we do better business for people, planet, and profit? So there's a lot of things there that we generally see is really important in that early phase there to happen. Now, what are some of the the real world examples or kind of tips and tricks that you've kind of seen, Christine, around that building that support and that internal engagement? How do you get sustainability really on the radar internally?
Yeah. I mean, within any company, you can kind of predict that you're going to have a similar sort of a range of opinions. You will have a group that's very passionate about moving forward with sustainability and with ESG and thinks that it's the right thing to do and is trying to push ahead with it. You're going to have a few people who don't think the company should do anything, that don't really believe it's a business issue, even if you have, aluminum factories failing in Europe that are kind of that are on the not wanting to take action, and you'll have a vast middle. But the thing with any kind of sustainability action is that it does require coordination across the company. And at base, that means you need to get your executive team on board, because let's say, you have your cross-functional committee working on that. Unless the executive that your committee representatives are reporting up through supports that work, that person's not going to have the time, the bandwidth, the resources, the influence to make anything happen. So you really have to do a lot of focus on building that executive team support. I always start this with individual conversations, one-to-one. I learned this the hard way. I came up when I was the chief sustainability officer with what I thought was a very reasonable kind of travel policy to mitigate both our carbon and our cost related to business travel. And it seemed sensible. I brought it to the executive team. That thing went down in flames. I mean, it was a hostile conversation, because I hadn't done the pre-work that was necessary. So I went back, I met with every single executive team individually, and talked with them, brought it to the next meeting, passed in 10 minutes. You can't underestimate the importance of spending that one-to-one time together. And then you can figure out, what people's reservations are, what they're excited about, and how to position and get that full range of support that you need in order to empower your cross-functional team and make sure they have the resources to move forward on your key priorities.
Great points. And it often is, particularly in larger businesses, it is a bit of internal politics, where you really have to build the relationships, the rapport, and really get people across a particular issue, like get them to understand it. And what we've seen, it's particular to people that say ESG is not my area, not my problem, someone else's your problem, you're the CSO or it's those people you really want to build that relationship with, get them on board, or at least educate them to a degree. And I think that can really make a difference, that if the people that are the most vocal opposition, if you can get one of two to at least understand where you're coming from, you'll make some real progress there. So once we've done that, what we see is, and I think you can roughly say that first relevance and building support, let's call it the preparation, a bit of due diligence, capacity building there. Once you go through those steps there and you feel that you know what the issues are, done your materiality assessment, you've worked out what you're doing, what you should be doing, you've looked at, how does that link together in a gap analysis, and you've had those conversations, executive level, potentially, you've educated, if you can, the board as well, taking them through where you are. You're really kind of ready to take that to the next step then. And that is going into that, looking at setting strategy and looking at the governance and oversight systems, taking action. So it's really about embedding sustainability, really about the initiatives like operational excellence. How can you do sustainability rather than just talk about it? And then finally, it's like, what are you going to do in terms of measuring your performance? So you've done a lot of things there. You've educated people, you've set strategy, you're taking actions, but ideally you want to have some way and some shape and form of a measurement system and disclosing your progress you're making there. So let's look at those three kind of next steps after that now. The first one, I just want to jump back to that slide that we looked earlier at. You see, we've kind of, we flagged that carbon emissions in this example company that they were doing relatively well. So the way we've already structured that is, let's look at that and what are some of the things that they are doing, and you see it really fits those three key areas there. So on that goals and targets that we looked at, that is really about thinking about strategy. At that strategic level, you want to look at, like I said, the governance and oversight system, but also your long-term objectives, your goals, your targets. And what are you then how are you actually gonna get to those goals and targets? That's where that action comes in. So in this case, it could be replacing diesel generator with solar arrays and batteries. Great. What are you doing then in terms of measuring and disclosing? Or you can measure and disclose your GHG emissions in scope 1 and 2 and 3 potentially. So it really shows you that some of the things you might already be doing and you might be forced to do from a compliance perspective, you really can start to put them under those boxes there. And again, I think it's really important in all these steps there to always keep in the back of your mind, what is compliance? What are some of the things that are a given I need to do? And also keep in mind that if there is compliance, there might also be assurance that's coming in place. So how are you doing these things? And with that, keep in mind that, think back to your maths teacher who said, great, you gave me the answer, but how did you get there? And that's really what assurance is also about, is document everything. Really make sure that all the things you do here, you document when was it done and who was part of that conversation. So keep notes and documentation, particularly if you know that assurance process will be required over some of the work that you're doing. There's a lot that can happen in these steps. Before we kind of go and jump in individually and look at each of these stages a bit more, and anything that stands out or any tips that you have here, Christine?
Yeah, I think it all flows together. So, I was just talking about building that buy-in one-to-one individually going across the company. Usually you need to have that in place before you can even get to that deep strategy building session, to where you have to have the folks that are going to make the decision on what are those, big priorities for next year, bought into even thinking about that, and then hopefully lining them up with what your needs have shown based on materiality and the assessment that you've done. So that strategy setting phase is really where you get down to those key priorities. And then, you've had that, stamp, you've identified what your key priorities are. It's time to action them. And hopefully at that point, you have all the support you need in order to be able to action. I guarantee if you set, a few goals in that strategy session, somebody is going to want to know how you're doing on them. It might be your clients, it might be your board, it might be your investors, it might be your employees. A lot of times employees are actually the biggest stakeholders and the biggest advocates for taking action on here. But you have to be prepared, even if you're not, regulatorily reporting, to be able to report progress in some way. So it's really, I designed this, framework to think about it in an annual sense. Like it's a cycle that you go through on an annual basis to make sure that you're continuing to improve.
And I think that's the key there, and goes back to, I think, a point that you made on LinkedIn as well. It's like, don't strive to be like, an A+ company, and particularly not overnight. Like, it is a continuous process. Every year you're doing something, you're working out, what can we focus on this year? What is within, a right-sized fit for our business to work on this year? And that is, I think, what stakeholders want to see as well, that you make progress, that you focus on the right issues at the right time, you get your stakeholders on board, that you listen to them, that you implement that, and that you demonstrate, you go through these steps. You've thought about it strategically, you've taken action, and you're reporting on how you're doing. And you, year over year, you're moving forward, rather than trying to, year one, do the best report, take the best actions you can, but then you can't move forward in year two because it's all been too much, get overwhelmed. So in terms of setting strategy, we already spoke about, finding, 1 to 3 key focus areas for your program. So really, I think the key thing here, strategy is the art of deciding what not to do. That goes really well, because we've seen there can be so much you could be focusing on. So that is really important. Another key thing is that I think is establishing that ESG governance. That's really an important area. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Christine, like why that's so important and how you should think about that.
Right now, I talk to so many executives who call sustainability or ESG a hot potato in their company, and it seems there isn't, unless you have a chief sustainability officer, which you do have at larger enterprises. There isn't a single executive office that it lives within. Can be legal. I had it with legal. It can be finance. It can be strategy. Can kind of be all over the place. And unless you have a single executive that can get called on the carpet for not meeting those objectives, things won't really move forward. So there's a first level step of, let's find an executive leader who is the point person in charge of it. Then there's a next level step of, in making sure that the entire executive team is bought into the idea that even though we have one executive responsible in charge of it, we're all responsible. So just like you have a CFO, that person is not responsible for making all the money and managing everything. They're just reporting on it. So you have to indoctrinate that. And then, the board is also critical. A lot of boards, are starting to ask for reporting on ESG issues, or starting to ask about materiality questions. And if your board isn't asking about that, then it's a good opportunity to bring it up and help them make sure that they are managing the material risks of the company in a way that aligns with their fiduciary duties.
I think that's a great point, the board there as well. Like, what we see is it's really important to think about the board and think about your directors, and are they ESG literate? Like, how much do they know about ESG sustainability? Do they know how to ask the right questions? So you might have your executive team educated, you got that responsibility clear there, who's accountable, we're all responsible. You got in your company maybe a cross-functional ESG working group that is actually pulling the data, measuring it, collecting it, putting it all together. But then if the board can't actually kind of, properly govern and provide that oversight, because they just don't know enough. They don't know what scope 1, 2, and 3 is around GHG emissions. That it's really important to make sure that you don't kind of forget the board, get them on board as well, and educate them. So board directors might sometimes, be a bit defensive around it if they realize they don't know something. So it's really important to work with that executive team and find a way in which you can understand what is that ESG literate level of my board, and what can we give them without telling them you don't know anything about this. It's like, how can you upskill them in a bit of a strategic way where they are positioned in a way that they can ask the right questions, because that's really important. So we also spoke about, understanding what that pathway is for meeting compliance requirements. There's not a lot of compliance in the US at the moment. But there will be things. The Canadians are definitely implementing the ISSB standards. There are some things on the books for the US coming, but with that also keep in mind that the Europeans have legislation that is live, that European companies need to report on, but also any foreign companies, so US companies or Canadian companies that have links to the EU or have a subsidiary there. So really be careful as well that if it's not within your core jurisdiction, have a look around. Where are your links? Where's your business? And what might affect you as well from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, just to add on there, I think one of the things for from a US perspective to understand, if you're not subject to those compliance requirements directly, I've talked with a lot of corporate leaders who are, you're just receiving more ESG questions from clients, pardon. And a lot of times those are actually driven by regulatory requirements that your clients are subject to. So it's important to understand not just your own regulatory situation, but your client's regulatory situation. Because if your client's coming to you and they're requesting something because they need it to comply with regulations, the client's going to have an urgency about that they will not have if it's just a nice to have. And you, as you're going into that discussion, you really need to know that driver behind, your client's request. So think through not just your own compliance, but your client's compliance as well.
And sometimes it's a great point. Sometimes that will become, quite suddenly very kind of an immediate problem. We had a large US transport company that suddenly got a request from one of their main customers out of Europe that they had to have, for a particular reason, an ESG score for one of those rating agencies of a certain level. And this transport company was 10 points below that. And they had 3 months to get there, or they would just lose the contract. And that was because their customer in Europe suddenly was faced with a lot of legislation that put all kind of policies in, and that required them again to request certain either ESG scores or policies or actions from everyone in their supply chain and in their value chain. So suddenly it might not be just the compliance itself, but how it is affecting everyone in your value chain that might come to you. So people will start requesting for a lot more data, information. So be ready for that, because it's coming quite quickly. Once we've set the strategy and we've thought about these steps, it really comes to that next step. And it's quite interesting that what we see is sometimes people kind of tend to forget about this, which is an odd thing, but we see it quite often where companies think, okay, we've set strategy, now we need to report on, but no, there's something in the middle that you need to actually do some things. You need to have that, of course, that annual ESG program, but work out there as well then, like, what are the things you're going to do over that year? So if you have those 3 focus areas, can you translate that into actual programs, initiatives, policies you're going to write and implement? Like, what are some of the real things you're going to do and actually do, and then measure and report on that? So if we take that example again from training, if you now say, well, workforce development, employee development is really important, it's a material topic, we haven't done anything, we set a strategy around it, you now need a plan. How are you going to do that this year then? And then with that, if you now have a training program you're implementing, what do you need to track as well around that? Maybe the hour of training per employee, or the cost of training per employee or per hour. So all those kind of metrics that you can report on that later. So that's a really important thing, taking action, but also having that working group, like we said earlier, have a group of people that can actually drive this on a more operational level is really important. And allowing time for actions to have an impact is really important as well. You won't see overnight what happens with some of these things. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that it will take some time to implement things. What are your thoughts on that action phase, and what do you see companies do in reality around taking actions?
Yeah. I mean, this is really interesting, and it kind of goes back to our conversation about the ordering of things. So a lot of times when companies first kind of get engaged in this, the kind of fire in the company can be driven by stakeholders who are asking for reporting. And if you've never done any kind of voluntary reporting or measurement or things like that, you can do an initial report without having gone through this action phase, because what you're doing is you're basically reporting on the initial assessment that you did, and hopefully you're setting some targets in the strategy. But where this will, if you're coming back to another reporting cycle and you haven't taken any action, that's where you get in trouble, because then you don't have anything to update, you don't have any progress, you look like you're not committed to the area. So it is important to have a plan and to make space for the actions to be done. And then I can't stress enough how critical it is to just drive this down to individual accountability. This isn't rocket science. Companies do cross-functional collaborative program building in many, many different areas. So dust off the kind of best practices that you have around project management, get out your charts, set out your tasks, set out your deadlines, and create that accountability down to an individual level, a department level, an item level, so that it's not just something where, okay, great, we've put it in a report that we're going to have 90% of our employees trained on our ethics policies. All right, who's going to get the training? Who's going to communicate it? How is it being, who in IT is in charge of setting it up, and kind of getting down into those details in that kind of action report. And, if ideally you can peel some time off of somebody who does project management in your company to really bring those best practices across.
And it's such a great point. Like, this is making sustainability and ESG real. It is embedding it. It is doing it. This is the doing part of it. But yeah, you need to touch upon the skills in your business and really bring people into it. And we do see that, people can get quite excited about this once they get it. And on the flip side, we've also seen companies that not done anything on reporting, not done anything on strategy, that just take actions. They say, oh, we do a million things on sustainability, but it's all ad hoc, it's all over the place. And that's where that strategy, the focus, the materiality comes in, but also the reporting. So and that's why those three components are so important, to have them kind of next to each other. And then finally, once you've done all that work, you do want to tell people what you're doing. So that's always a key component. So ensure that you really think about that reporting phase as well. What is right sized for your business? And think about, what do you have to do? So what is the compliance you might have to already report on that might be coming in? So if it's not there yet, think about what is coming your way in the next 1, 2, 3 years, so that you get ready. Think about, if you want to report on ESG standards, which ones? GRI, SASB, CDP, there's a whole range of them, and why. So really think that through. Think about, are you already doing a sustainability report? Are you planning to do one? And what shape and form that is? And how does that link back to any of the ESG standards or the compliance? And what does your business require more internally? So does your board want to report every quarter, every board meeting every month? Who knows what it might be? But think about who needs that information, and how you're setting up measurement and data collection system, but also what do you need to report more internally to make sure, like to your point, Christine, about project management, that people are across what's happening. And then with that, think about realistic timeframes, think about resourcing. So it can take a lot of time reporting. So start on time and work your way back from where you need to be. So if you know the report is due at the end of the calendar year, work your way back from when do you need to start and what do you need to put in place. And also, who is going to do all that work? Because sometimes there's quite a bit involved in that. And then, as we've said, so reporting is that final step. Often, if you go through this journey, you've done all these things you want to report. It's the output of all the other things there. But we'll look in a minute as well at how some companies, to your point earlier, Christine, like sometimes start with reporting and then suddenly everything else falls in place. What are you, from your perspective, what you see companies do from a reporting perspective? What are some of the, the good and the not so good practices, so to say, around reporting?
Yeah. So first, you need to think about reporting broadly. There's, of course, some companies will be subject to regulatory reporting, particularly in Europe, and you have regulatory reporting coming up in California over the next few years. There's some industry reporting. So there's that whole framework to it. There's also, the companies can opt into frameworks, so a GRI, or a carbon disclosure project, or be invited to do or required to do something like an EcoVadis report by their clients. And then there's just the voluntary reporting that you put out on your website. And the thing I always kind of caution around reporting a little bit, it's absolutely critical that you drive transparency to your stakeholders. That's ultimately, we started with the assessment in the beginning, figuring out what is it that your clients and your investors and your employees expect. If you don't do any reporting, then they won't know what you're up to. But if you pile on all of these different frameworks and do something kind of customized for each, you won't at the end of the you won't get any actual action done. I mean, that you'll spend all of your time reporting. So you have to be kind of strategic about how much you take on, and absolutely right size it to your company. I like to talk about the minimum viable report. And for me, that is, the report where you're just focusing on what is the key data that my stakeholders need in order to realize, yes, you're running a committed, responsible business that's addressing the major risks and opportunities related to ESG. And going back to, that's why it lines up with the assessment in the beginning, and then the strategy. You've picked your particular areas, and then that's what you're focusing in on your report. And it can be a little bit different approach. For a long time, this kind of reporting was in the domain of marketing, and the reports kind of got very large. And we had a lot of marketing professionals that were really dedicated and passionate about doing those. And if you're a marketing professional and you're on here, I don't want to pick on you at all. But you have to, if you're coming into this from a new perspective and you're just building a program, you need to take the step slowly instead of over committing to reporting, realizing that it's going to it'll consume resources that you could otherwise spend on action. So you have to hit that balance between transparency, providing your stakeholders what they need, and over investing time and resources in a reporting exercise.
Yeah, no, excellent point. And I want to pick up on the marketing exercise there. We've seen that for years, that sustainability reports were very beautiful, and they had really interesting case studies, but it was not a lot of good quality comparable data that you could year over year or between companies compare. And what we see happening now, I think particularly coming out of Europe with their corporate reporting, sustainability reporting directive, is that sustainability reporting at large is really moving into that realm of it needs to be elevated to the same level as financial reporting. So we're going to see ESG sustainability reporting is going to be non-financial disclosures, and we're going to move away from those pretty reports to really in-depth, robust, really kind of clear disclosures that take a lot of effort and time to really go through and put that together. Assurance will be required as well. The disclosures are going to sit in that annual report with your financial information as well. So we're going to move away over time from that, pretty marketing exercise to real, data and reporting there. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Focus on the things that are really important, the material issues only. And we've seen also companies that start out with a materiality assessment, look at what's material and report on an entirely different set of topics. Now, that doesn't follow through. So really make sure that you kind of use everything logically. But the materiality assessment tells you what's important. Get a focus on the 2 or 3 areas where you really can make a difference, and use that information and that kind of narrow down scope to what's important to your business to report on, and really kind of make sure that you really report in terms of key information that's replicable, that's accurate. So the reporting phase is changing from 5 or 10 years ago. We'll see that it's becoming much more integrated with financial reporting. Now, once we've gone through all that, I think 2 things are really interesting to just quickly pick on before we kind of wrap up this webinar, is that there's two ways I think you can look at, two imperatives to consider when you look at ESG and sustainability at large. It's more what I would call the strategic imperative there. We are really thinking about how do we use sustainability and ESG as a way to access capital and markets and workforce. So it's really a more proactive approach. And then there's the compliance approach, which is more about a reactive approach. It's about, oh, I need to report on something, suddenly compliance is come in. So it's about starting with the reporting before you often do some of the other steps. So what I've done here is kind of try to put that into a little bit of perspective. There is if you look at the bottom there, on the bottom, you see the strategic imperative on the left there, where you start, you've done your relevance, you built your support, so you've done all those things. And it really sets you up well to think through those next 3 phases of strategy, action, and reporting. But we see a lot of companies now that suddenly are forced into sustainability at large, coming more from that compliance imperative, where reporting is really the gateway into ESG and so they can get bogged down a lot with just doing reporting and spending all their time and resources on that, without missing some of the other steps there. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that there's strategic benefits to being proactive, but also there are compliance requirements coming your way. So if the compliance is not there yet, start that journey now and start to work your way through it, that by the time compliance is in place, you need to report, you've done all the other steps already. So with that, really quickly, a bit of a wrap up there. What are some actions to get started and to improve? We spoke about that double materiality assessment, working with your stakeholders, making sure that everyone is involved in ESG. So really making it everyone's business. Don't pile it all on the CSO or the ESG lead's desk and say it's not my problem there. Remember that reporting is an important part, often the last part of your annual journey. There's a lot more to do. I think you're focused on this a few times, Christine, is creating that right-sized approach for your business. I think that's such an important thing there, that it's proportionality. And even like with European legislation there and a lot of other things, it's really focused about proportionality. There's often generous phase-ins. It's about doing what you can do right now, but being transparent is really important and demonstrating you're making progress. And then that final point, be proactive. So don't sit there and wait for it all to kind of hit you at some point. Work your way through this and, gain the value from that strategic perspective. Think about the triple bottom line. There's a lot to be gained from doing better business. Don't leave it on the table. Is there anything, Christine, that you would add to this list in terms of companies that are thinking about starting that ESG roadmap or enhancing their roadmap?
Yeah, I try to find the fun in it. I mean, it all sounds like a ton of work, but and it is. Sustainability professionals work very hard, but you have to connect it in with why you are getting out of bed every day and where do you find joy and feeling good about your job when you go home at the end of the day too. So, it needs to be, more than reporting. Our lives and our jobs need to be more than assessments. So think about how the impact of what you're doing really connects in with your values and your organization's values.
And I think that's such a really good way to just bring and kind of close the loop on that. And with sustainability, think about how does it actually link to your business model? Often they say, what's your corporate purpose? But think about that. There's a reason that people focus on that. Like, what are you really with your business trying to do? Yes, you're potentially trying to create, maximize the value for shareholders, but that's not the core reason you're running the business. There's some reason someone started that business to do something. And if you can, link sustainability to that and think about your business model and think about why are we in this game and how can we do that better, cleaner and greener, it can become a bit more exciting and sometimes a bit more fun as well when you think about that, how you can really do the right thing here. And that triple bottom line, yes, we're still making great profits, but we're also doing good business for people and planet. And hopefully that will get you out of bed a bit more positive. With that, the question always is how can we get help? So Socialsuite is really focused on a set flag that is start on helping you with software and support to do that double materiality assessment. So in that relevant phase, And often that really helps you have that conversation internally to build that support there. So that preparation phase, we can do a lot of, work with you there. Christine, I think, you can provide support across all of this, if I'm correct. So I would definitely say reach out to Christine if these, any of these areas or, overall that you need support on. With that, then, if you have any questions, we put them in the chat if you want to ask them right now. Seth's coming back on to just go through that, but also make sure that, reach out later. We often see that a webinar has a lot of information, and you might have a lot of questions after that. So make sure that you, find us again if there's still questions lingering on your mind. And with that, Seth, I want to, hand it back to you and see if there's any questions that have come up in the chat that we can answer.
Yeah, well, that was great. And Christine introduced a new acronym, the MRP, which I had not heard of before, the minimally viable report. So that's a great one. And a more common, I know about the MVP, which we use at Socialsuite, the minimal viable product. But the MRP will be one that we'll be using as well. So thanks for sharing that. So that was a really great webinar. I did receive a couple questions from the audience directly. So the first one is, we got one fellow who asked, I've had trouble getting our executive team to lean in to our sustainability program. What are some best practices to improve engagement from our executive team? I'll maybe, Christine, if you want to give a crack at that.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt that's the tough part that a lot of people struggle with. And I think you really have to take it down to an individual level, not a team level, and you have to understand what the drivers are within each individual's executive's area. For example, you may be able to get your sales executive engaged by pointing out and understanding what the client's needs in this area are. HR, you go to HR and talk to them about what employee expectations are. Your CFO sometimes can be the toughest cookie and sometimes can be a huge supporter, but CFOs are driven by financial data, so you need to be able to show how what you're doing will improve the value, will save on costs, will open up new opportunities. So when you're building that executive team support, I wouldn't think about it as the executive team monolith. I would think about it as individual, both their roles and their personal beliefs, and tailor it to that. And then you at some point you get the collection of the individuals to kind of get that broader support.
Fantastic. All right, well that's all the questions I got today. Let's look to wrap up. I think we have this final slide here. So Christine, thanks for providing your LinkedIn there. If anybody wants to reach out to Christine, please reach out to her LinkedIn URL that she just put into the chat. If you want to reach out to myself or Tim, our contact information is right here as well. And if you enjoyed today's content and the presentation today, please subscribe to our newsletter. We put it into the chat. And if you're seeing this on YouTube and our YouTube channel later, you'll see a link in the description area of the video to be able to also sign up with our newsletter there as well. And of course, if you're interested in materiality or have any questions around helping you get started, please feel free to reach out. Thanks so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you. And thanks again, Christine, for joining us.